Today's keynote panel, Redefining Work is Every Job a Climate Job, will explore how each of us can drive climate action through our careers. And we're lucky to have an incredible panel here with us today. Before we start, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes. So this session is being recorded, as you've just probably noticed. We're also going to start with a discussion followed by a bit of audience Q&A before we close. So as the conversation unfolds, please do post and upvote each other's questions within Zoom's dedicated Q&A window. We also have the wonderful Angela, who's my co-founder at Regen City, who's going to kindly support today's event. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, featuring 5 leaders who I deeply respect and organizations dedicated to empowering professionals to leverage their careers for meaningful impact. Each has made it their mission to support and inspire others in this journey, and I'm genuinely grateful to share this space with them today. So without delay, I'm delighted to introduce Leonie Barron, Head of Community and Talent at MCJ, the VC backing founders rewriting industries for the future. Pauline Maniat, Global Lead at The Week, which is a 3-session experience with friends or colleagues to help us face the environmental crisis and make sense of it. Matthew Shribman, Co-founder, CEO, and Chief Scientist at Aim High Earth, who provide transformational training, insights, and ideas through immersive experiences and consulting to deliver data-backed positive impact. Jessica Marathi Radpavar, founder and lead impact strategist at Reconsidered, an impact strategy and communication studio, and the Change Hub, a membership community for busy, sustainable business professionals. And last but by no means least, Vicky Howitt, UK development lead at Climate Fresk, the 3-hour interactive workshop which teaches you about our changing climate system and empowers you to take high impact climate action. So let's dive in. To start, I'd love to hear from each of you your perspective on how to approach the kind of what I call the big question, which is, where should I work to have the greatest impact? How should we be thinking about evaluating this kind of vast landscape and spectrum of climate work, if you will? And how do you approach, figuring out, like, do I need to transition into a climate specific role or organization to have an impact, or is there actually more leverage for climate action within my existing role? So perhaps Leonie, you could kick us off.
It would be an honor. My goodness. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Ben. I'm really, really excited to be here. And for this whole week, the program is insane. So yeah, it's going to be a good one. I think it's a massive question, and I think it's a really important question. And I think it's a question that we don't touch on enough. We have this idea that climate jobs happen in climate startups. You have to leave the work you're currently doing, providing you're not working in a climate startup already, in order to join one. And that's where you can have impact. But I think that's a really, really dangerous message. And I think that is arguably an incorrect mindset. I do believe every job can be a climate job and is a climate job. I think a massive step that I encourage anyone to take, and I think is really important, is for people to assess the role they have now and truly see if they can get to the bottom of understanding the impact it's already having. Knowing the work we do is something we assume we know the work we do, we go into work every single day, but really thinking through, like, what are the tertiary or second order effects of what I'm doing, and how can I actually start to take action from where I currently am. I think working on climate, not in climate, but on climate, is more of a mindset shift than it ever is a job spec. And I think it's also, we have to tune into the idea that it's a dial that we turn up versus a switch that we make. And so when it comes to should I stay or should I go, I think evaluating the work that you have now and the impact you can have from where you're at now is a really, really essential step. We physically can't have everyone quitting their jobs and going into startups or kind of explicitly climate solution oriented organizations. If anything, there's a huge, huge opportunity for people within perhaps larger industries or incumbent businesses or businesses that realistically aren't going anywhere over the next 20, 30 years, to see what they can do from that vantage point and kind of really use that as a leverage point. So that is step one to the evaluating where should I work to have an impact is to truly not perhaps buy into, I think, very understandably, a lot of the rhetoric about climate startups and climate jobs being a thing you don't have. But to kind of internalize it and try and understand how is my job already a climate job and what can I do from this vantage point that I currently have.
Thank you. And maybe to hand over to Jess, I know you do a lot of work with kind of internal change agents, and that's quite a specific, vocation, if you will. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And before starting Reconsidered, I also worked within a global multinational with 34,000 people as one of those internal change agents. And so, serve the community, but also have that lived experience. And to be honest, I do feel like every job can be a climate job with a bit of a caveat that you ask yourself, is that climate job available within my organization or from my current vantage point, a job for me that's suited for me, that brings me joy, that is complementary to my capabilities and strengths. Because certainly, if you choose to stay in a role within an organization that is not have climate at its core, then your role would shift to one of change management. The role of an internal change agent is frequently, needing to persuade and influence without authority and navigate complicated stakeholder engagement dynamics. It's really, as you said, Benjamin, a vocation. It's not a 9 to 5. And it can really take quite a lot out of you. And it's suited to people who thrive from that challenge, who look at these complicated, change management tasks as being really energizing. But not everybody does. And then you get into kind of a, burnout situation that is so common among folks working in corporate responsibility and ESG roles. So it is a very personal question, and I think very personal to both your current organization and where you stand in it and what your current level of influence and social capital is, but also how you want to show up at work in your day to day, what strengths, capabilities, personality traits you bring to that work, and whether you feel you're up to the task of being that change agent. So, yeah, a bit of a yes and a no.
Thank you. And Pauline, perhaps you want to comment on that because I know you also support, lots of folks working within organizations to drive change.
Yes, I think at every job you can start a climate conversation. I don't think every job can be a climate job. Like I would define a climate job as like really spending your time working on that cause. We work with a lot of people who start conversations within their company, and I think it's very powerful. And I think, as Jess said, it asks for certain profiles of people who are like, okay, I'm gonna influence and I'm gonna mobilize and I'm going to, and it's a courageous work, and I think it's super impactful. And so I agree that you don't need to think about changing your job to have great impact. So we see a lot of people starting that conversation, even though sometimes it's not even their mandate, it's not their job, and they just do it on the side, and then they can build their job within that organization because they've started doing that. Then maybe if the company is willing to change, they can build their own job within the company of change agents. What we see is that sometimes it's just, I think some jobs you have to really decide and think for yourself, is it part of what we want in the future or not? I've talked to some people who are part of oil and gas company and who are trying to do CSR, and it's impossible because they need to talk about climate change, but they shouldn't talk about the impact of fossil fuels. So it's kind of an impossible job. So I think to some extent, every job can be a climate job, but I think some industries have to transform at such a ambitious level that it can also be sometimes greenwashing. So but you'll feel it. So I think it's something that you can feel it within yourself. Do you have a mandate? Is the company honestly trying to change? And it takes time and it's hard, and so it's not a lack of willingness, it's just that it is work. Or is it part of you know, an industry where there's not much change that can happen. And then I think in this case, resignation can be also a powerful act of explaining why you're leaving. You know, as a consumer, I do it on some services where I say, I will not use your service anymore because you are part of that problematic project. And I think it can also be strong. So wherever you are, you can start this conversation. It's a way to test. Can you build a job out of it? Do you have the strength and personality to do that? And I think that's amazing when you do, because that's where you have most impact, because you know your company from within. And if you, after sometimes a few years, you see nothing, like it's hard and it's taking the joy out of you, then sometimes also moving away is okay.
And Matthew, it would be great to get your thoughts on this. I know obviously Aim High do, you know, a lot of work with organizations in this space, and I'm sure you have a really interesting kind of window into some of these thought processes with your clients.
Sure. Yeah, I actually think Leonie, Jess, and Pauline have summarized this really nicely with some slightly differing opinions on things. But imagine that you're at a school, and the school has your classic hierarchy. You've got your cool kids, your sporty kids, your music nerds, and so on. But at this school, the cool kids aren't just your kind of like benign cool kids like most schools. They're also really big bullies. And they're making a mess of the whole student community, both now and setting in place patterns that could persist and worsen for years to come. Now, your mission is to flip the social hierarchy so that the biology nerds are on top. Now, how do you do that? Now, where do you start? Like, you could join the cool kids. You could infiltrate. You could figure out how to shift their culture from within. And short term, you even get to be cool too. Or you join the biology nerds and work to make them cooler. You could do that. Or you could even like go for the head teacher and you could try and shift the rules so that the common room gets closed down where everyone likes to hang out. And instead, everyone has to hang out in the greenhouse and it's full of plants where all the biology nerds have more of a chance to shine. I don't know. The point is that you can push this system from anywhere. The best way to know if you're actually pushing it positively or not is to understand enough about how the whole system works and about how interconnected the climate and nature emergency, or in this case, the situation that the cool kids are creating, about how interconnected that all is, and to be able to feel if you're actually driving some kind of positive change. You just need to understand that whole system enough, and I think that really kind of is a good or reasonable analogy for what's going on in the climate and nature emergency. For as long as you don't understand the system, you can't really know if you're helping out or not, which is why it's so important that we keep learning always.
Thank you. And then finally, Vicky, obviously your work at Fresk kind of spans, you know, individuals. I think 60% of Fresk are kind of hosted by organizations. So you probably have quite interesting kind of breadth of perspective across these two kind of worlds. But yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Definitely echoing a lot of what everybody's saying here. I think I was going to start from a personal perspective as well. So, you know, I asked myself the question, should I stay or should I go? I was working in the advertising industry before and I loved the creativity and I enjoyed the people that I was working with. But I was working very long hours and I felt quite burnt out by the whole experience. And I felt like I wanted to be doing something more meaningful, but I just didn't have the energy to be doing it at that time. You know, I just didn't have the headspace and the energy. And so for me personally, I decided like, I've just got to stop, you know, and I literally typed in more meaningful career into Google. Like, you know, like you said, Ben, I would have loved to have had something like this there because I was a bit lost. So I decided to take that step. You know, I kind of assessed my own personal mental headspace. And I also had, you know, I was lucky enough, I had the financial means to be able to do that. So I think it's really important to think about your own personal needs and balancing that with the impact that you might want to have, because actually you might be shooting yourself in the foot a little bit if you just kind of quit your job and then you're like, oh, actually, this is a much harder thing that I need to do. So I think now in my role at Climate Fresk, I've actually seen there's many more pathways to actually have an impact in your current role, or even, you know, in a role elsewhere if you need to. But I think it's about maybe starting small, testing and learning, kind of echoing what Pauline was saying, like try something. Like, and with Climate Fresk, that's a really accessible way to do that, because you can, if just as an individual you just want to upskill yourself, as Matthew was saying, you just want to learn a bit more about the system, you can just join a public workshop, so you can really start to build your knowledge around, you know, the climate system and how it's, you know, becoming a bit more of an expert about it. And then if you feel comfortable, you can then start to bring it to your organization. And you can do that in a very kind of grassroots, like, you know, bottom up way, where you can really engage just the colleagues around you. Or you can, you know, if you feel like you have a bit more buy-in from your organization, you feel like there's a few sustainability initiatives already happening, you can really then try and speak to kind of more key decision makers and stakeholders and say, hey, actually, you know, we've got this really great workshop or other types of sustainability workshops, and we'd like to bring it in. And it's a way of actually bringing people around a table together and having those conversations. So I think, yeah, definitely thinking about your own personal needs, but there's, you know, if you feel like you can bring something into your work, then start there. If you feel like it's working, great, you can build on that. If you feel like it's not working, then yeah, reassess that question and be like, okay, is it time for me to now leave? So yeah, balancing, I think, is really important.
Thank you. And that's kind of a lovely segue onto my next question. So I think for our audience today, kind of really zoning in on kind of what are one or two kind of immediate actions that, you know, one can take to increase, you know, their kind of impact through their work, whether that's driving climate action internally within their current organization, or, you know, looking to explore kind of opportunities within kind of climate focused organizations and roles. You know, we've talked a little bit about upskilling, which could be one of those things as well. So Matthew, we'd love to kind of hear your perspective on like where's a good place to start.
Okay, so, well, firstly, I think the communication challenge of getting people to understand that this is an emergency is, I don't want to say over, but it's much more over than it was. So some 70% of people in, I think it's G20 countries now, support the idea of making ecocide a crime. Insurers around the world now consider climate of significant relevance and have dedicated teams on it. So I think that now it's less about convincing people that it's an emergency and that we need to get moving, and it's a lot more about helping people to, well, firstly, understand in depth so that we can understand how the system works, so that we can understand how to move it, as I was saying with that analogy, and also to undo the remaining waves of misinformation. And I say remaining as if they're small. If anything, the waves of misinformation are going to get bigger to try and distort the overall narrative. So I think really good learning is really important. And I know there are several other speakers are involved in this. This is what AIM-High-Earth does as well, helping people to understand what's going on so that people can be immune to that misinformation. I think that is incredibly important. So even at the point where you feel that you're like aware that this is an emergency and you're up for and you want to act on this, I think making sure that you understand how the system interconnects and how different things affect one another remains really important. Otherwise, you will do something like you will deprioritize anything to do with plastics, because you'll see it as this kind of disconnected thing over there that's like, oh, okay, it's probably bad that there's plastic in the ocean that's obstructing animals being able to breathe or whatever. But actually then you'll miss the fact that plastic is hydrophobic. And so all the poisons of the world that find their way into the ocean stick to these little pieces of plastic. Things in the ocean then eat them, accumulate all the poisons, which then feeds all the poisons into the food chain, our food chain. And then that sends it straight back to us. And yeah, ultimately plastic is one of the worst possible things. But anyway, you might miss those things if you don't understand the whole system. So I'd definitely say learn is key. And then on top of that, the other thing is about, I would suggest is building community, which I know we're going to talk about later. So I won't go into that now, but I'd say that's probably the other key action. Back to you.
Thank you, Matthew. And I know Vicky, you kind of talked a little bit about what you do at Fresk. But yeah, but like I personally think of, you know, the kind of Fresk workshop as also a great place to start? Maybe you could kind of comment on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the really kind of engaging things about Climate Fresk is that we run a lot of these workshops in person. And I think often when people don't really know where to start, it's really nice to just meet other like-minded people. And even though we do run online workshops and they're also really, really effective, I think sometimes just meeting people and having that human connection is really, really important. It's a, like, Matthew said, learning is a really good learning tool and understanding system. But I think for me personally, when I did it for the first time, I really felt like, oh, I've got a bunch of people around the table who are all coming at it from different perspectives and they're bringing their own knowledge, but we all were here and we all want to learn something. And we all kind of have questions and curiosity, and then you kind of come away from that experience with, a group of people that you actually can then follow up with after. And I know people have joined our public workshops before and they've set up WhatsApp groups and they've kind of created kind of networks and communities off the back of that. So I think human connection is really, really important. And yeah, that's why, we run lots of public workshops where you can join. Actually, it's globally all around the world and it's translated into about 160 languages now. I think the cards have been translated, and we have facilitators around the world who are running those workshops. So I think if you can get to a Climate Fresk workshop, have a look and see what's available. And, to echo that point as well, just networking and meeting people in the space. So go to lots of talks, go to events, just go and meet people. And I think you'll realize that, the climate world is so much more varied and interesting, and you find out about all of these things you didn't even know about just from having conversations with people. So be curious, I think, and yeah, go along and be brave. And I know it's not, networking is not for everyone, it can be scary, but I think you'll realize as well, everybody in the space is so lovely and so nice, and everybody wants to help. So just feel brave and offer to kind of have a coffee with someone that you've never met and you've maybe seen them do something you want to do on LinkedIn, and just send them a message. So yeah, try and connect with people, I think, would be my one thing to say.
And Jess, maybe kind of switching gears a little bit within this question to kind of focus on the internal activism piece. I know one of the things that we discussed when we spoke before this was this kind of resilience muscle that is really important to build if you're an internal change agent. And where, if you are looking to drive change within your organization, where's a good place to start? And yeah, would love to hear kind of how you support people on that journey.
Yeah. Thank you for that invitation. I had spoken about that there are, these kind of hard skills to build up, certainly, depending on the roles that you're seeking out, but also the personal work of being a change agent. And, I think resilience is one often, and it's very specific to the role, but especially if you're looking at sustainability roles within companies. You're often getting doors closed in your face and no's left and right. And so that idea of showing up fully resourced and as a human, and building up your resilience muscle, building up these other skills that can help you not get knocked down or demotivated by the nature of the work, I think is really important. And we've created a bit of a curriculum around this for a course that we've created. The other thing I was going to share in answer to this question was just beefing up your knowledge of how change works, whether that's kind of on an organizational level by studying change management, or on a one-to-one level by studying behavioral science. And there's a few resources that we've created that I'll drop links to in the chat. But I really do feel that, especially if you're in these positions where you're needing to influence quite regularly, having that moment to zoom out and kind of get more maybe of an academic understanding of how these things all play out is important.
Thank you. And kind of coming back to that point, I know, Leonie, one of the things that we were kind of spoken about before this was, really, if you're an internal change agent or looking to be one, kind of assessing what that net gain is. And, perhaps in some cases where people decide they need to leave their position, it's when the cost is too high, whether that's kind of a health and well-being, cost perhaps. But so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But also, one other thing you mentioned to me previously kind of stuck with me around, we can often be guilty of almost this kind of analysis paralysis, and actually coming back to this question, where do you start? Like how, what can you achieve within, say, one quarter? So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on where to get started.
Yeah, totally. And what a fascinating discussion. I'm loving this. I'm learning so much from everyone. Um, yeah, on the net game point, I think everyone's made some great points, just in particular around this idea of resilience and not burning out. And I think it's an interesting question, again, to be really, really self-aware of. Um, you know, Trying to affect change from within is hard. It's really hard and it's often lonely. And I think you need to build up communities of people around you who are doing the same, to give yourself the best chance of doing that well. The first job I ever had, anecdotally, was for a drinks company, and I kind of grew into the position of sustainability lead. I'm not kidding you, principally because I was the vegetarian on the team, and I was new, and they kind of wanted to figure out how to keep me. So it was like, oh my goodness, you like plants, you can make us B Corp, which was real fun, but also really, really, really hard. And I didn't know the ways of the working world, and I was very, very literally green to it. And so I didn't know how to kind of bring people along on that journey and how to affect change from within and how to, like, I didn't have my own level of resilience to be able to do that well, and it was really, really draining as a result. And this was for a company who, to their credit and to this day, like, very honestly do want to be better environmentally. So relatively, I should have had a really easy ride with it. But it was really, really hard. So I think a big question is, if I'm going to burn myself out in this position, is the net gain for this whole industry worth it? Should I, if I'm going to burn myself out in this position, but I would actually be thriving in a different one, which maybe was more obviously climate focused or was for a more obviously climate oriented company, um, then yeah, that's an important question to ask before you shift. Um, to the point of like, to the point of analysis paralysis and kind of what to do, I think there are things I would do and there are things I wouldn't do. I would, as we've discovered, like, look at your job. I do think every job is a climate job, and I think that doesn't mean it's a good climate job. That means it is absolutely having a climate impact, whether that is good or bad. And so figuring that out to begin with, as I mentioned before, is a really important first step. I cannot think of a job that isn't a climate job. It just might not be totally obvious. Um, so yeah, do that analysis, and then get involved. For context, MCJ is a VC first and foremost, but we have a large 3,500 member community. And most of my work is figuring out how to help those 3,500 people be what I call meaningfully useful. Because I think when you really boil it down, that is what most people are looking to be. We want to do something. That is why you're on this call. That is why you're here. And I think often the people who I think feel like they become meaningfully useful the quickest are the people who show up, the people who get involved, people who reach out authentically to offer to help, people who look at where they're currently at and go, what can I do with the skills? What can I do in my local area? What volunteering opportunities are there? I know volunteering is a really difficult thing for a lot of people. It's not something that everyone can do. But thinking through, like, what can I do this week? Like, what is feasibly within my grasp this week? Versus how do I need to orient myself in this massive system to have a long-term effect? I think that is a really important question to ask, but it's scary. I don't know the answer to that myself as well. Like, that's a forever kind of question. I think you need to focus on, what can I do this week, and what does that look like? What does showing up look like? And if you ask that question every single week, you're going to have a pretty big impact, regardless of whether you switch your job or not. So those are some things I would do. I also think showing up, I call it like increasing your surface area for serendipity, because so often opportunities sure go to people who can do them, but love it or hate it, they go to people who are in the room or who know that opportunity exists or who saw online and applied. And so increasing your surface area for serendipity is a kind of practice that I would be in a constant state of. And that means showing up to events, as Vicky mentioned. That means reaching out to people. That means building genuine relationships with other people in this space. That means getting involved, helping out, supporting, whatever that looks like. So yeah, I would think through your current job, be in a constant state of kind of increasing your surface area for serendipity for this kind of work. And then there are some things I wouldn't do. I think learning is so important. I think everyone on this call is doing an amazing job. I would really realize though that climate is a through line in everything. It's not a sector. And so as a result, when you're starting to learn about climate, you're essentially learning how the world could work and you're learning how the world does work. And that is massive. That is massive as a thing to try and do. As I don't think that you're going to be able to understand everything in a week or a month or a year. There's still so much I have no idea about. So I wouldn't try and relearn the world before you do anything. I would not fall into the trap of like analysis paralysis. I would go, cool, like what information can I start to like chunk off? I would go to climate breasts. I would really just think through like bit by bit by bit by bit, what can I learn for sure? And again, similar to being like increasing your surface area serendipity, be in a constant state of that. But don't think that you're going to get to the point where you feel like you truly know enough to be able to take action, because sure, that point could exist, but it's going to take a while. It is just going to take a while. So yeah, try not to feel like you have to understand everything, because it's massive. It's a through line through everything that we do, and instead just think through like, what do I need to know to be dangerous? Like what information do I need to be able to do something? And it's likely that you can get to that point in a week or two. So yeah, that's what I would do, and that's the kind of trap that I wouldn't fall into yet.
Thank you. I love that. And that kind of nicely segues to a question I had around the role of community when you're building a climate career. And how do you find, or find the your people, or create a community that can kind of support your climate goals or career goals? Actually, Pauline, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. When we were speaking previously, you mentioned, yes, finding allies within your organization, but also part of that means engaging people who aren't like you. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yes, I think as Leon and so many people talked before me, it's something you shouldn't be doing alone. We came back to this idea of community a few times in the discussion. So it's really important to find people you can do that with, because that's how you're gonna stay in the long run. So you can find them allies within your company, outside your company. But I think, and I've been part of the climate ecosystem for 12 years now, and democracy and like these different causes, and I keep just bumping into the same people. And I'm like, we need to get out of our bubbles and really connect with other people, because what we see is that there are a few people who are really active. There are a few people who are climate deniers, and on that, I'm not sure it's where we should put our efforts. But there's a broad middle of people who know there's a problem, but don't fully understand the magnitude of it. Know there's a problem, but have a really hard time telling you what a solution could be. Know there's a problem, but oh, it's scary and it's massive. And so, I'm just going to focus on my family and my work and like act as if nothing's happening. And if we don't manage to get these people to join the cause, we're going to be in the same place in 10 years. So that's something that we came up with the week, was how do we go to this broad middle, and it's people who know there's a problem, but who have been actively, cognitive dissonance. It's like, I'm actively, I hear that, I've seen what's happened in Spain, but I turn off the TV and I go to my work. I see what's happening in Florida, but I close the newspaper and I play with my kids. And so I never have a full picture of what's happening, and I never let it go to my heart and my emotions. So at the week, it was really like, how do we create safe spaces in groups for people to go through that and to have these deep conversations that are not only understanding the problem, but feeling the problem, so that the way you see the future massively change, and now it becomes part of the way you see the future and you want to be in the future. So and so that means that we need to start having these conversations with people we can really influence. And as social animals, we're part of many groups, and scientists have been talking and talking, but when your best friend tells you something, we don't know why, but it has much more impact in the way you're going to change your behavior. So just starting these conversations with your colleagues, starting this conversation. I've done the week with my parents, and because I was like, I'm tired of being the activist in the family, so I'm just going to have someone else do the work and then be part of that conversation with my parents, where it's no judgment, it's not a debate, it's just, this is what I feel, and I'd like to have this conversation. And now with my family, it's like we've had that common conversation, so we can build from that. And so in your company, it's like, if you want to change the provider, because you're not in a climate job, but you can change your client, you can change your providers, you can have a lot of impact. You probably need people to agree on that with you, and you probably need people who are not already super active on the topic. So you need to get that conversation going, and that's somewhere you can have massive impact.
Thank you. Matthew, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the role of community and how you're bringing together kind of teams, and how kind of the I guess the role that learning can play in kind of building that community as well.
So I think we're all the experts of where we are. We're all very good at the stuff that we do. Most of us on this call have been doing it for quite a while, and we're really good at that thing. And that's why I think the idea that you can work on climate in multiple different places is really important, because if you are both the expert of the area that you work on, and you understand enough because you've really been learning about how to move things, that you can then make sure that what you're an expert of can be put to can be geared in such a way that you're driving positive change, then that's really great. But it keeps coming back to the same thing of you need to know how the whole system interconnects, and how can you possibly do that without community? Leonie was saying this about how there's so much to learn. You really need to multiply that out across the people around you if you're going to be able to pull in all the knowledge that you need. I think it's very important to be mindful of the fact that the world that we live in today is kind of like there's this analogy of an elephant, and you've got all these scientists who are studying it, but they're studying just a really specific part of the elephant, and they don't see anything else. So one of them is studying just like the tip of the ear, and the other one is like right on the kind of back of the left thigh, like really zoomed in. And the world of today kind of encourages us to do that. We often survive best in our jobs, or thrive best if we are in a really deep niche where we're irreplaceable. But what that means is that we don't easily have this effect of being able to zoom out and actually see the whole elephant. And the joke of that analogy is that none of the scientists know that they're looking at an elephant. So I think we have to make our communities as diverse as possible, because otherwise we will miss a lot of stuff. Knowing what others are doing is really, really crucial. And I think you can have try to have fun with this, and try to think who are the kinds of people that you like connecting with. So this weekend I spent my Saturday with someone who loves collecting fungi from the woods and knows all the different kinds of fungi. And on a Sunday I spent it with a guy who's building fusion reactors. And I'm just for me, I'm trying to interconnect across the science space, because that's the bit that I really want to understand. But that also means that during the week I'm then connecting with people who are figuring out how to move big corporations, how to change government, how to move communities, because there's only so much we can learn. And yeah, Aim High Earth, I mean, I put in the chat a kind of rough summary of some of the communication things. I hope I didn't get any of these wrong, but yeah, at Aim High Earth we're focusing on fast-paced, emotive, live and interactive training for big teams at big organizations. And one of the things that I didn't mention there, but that is quite important, is that we do a lot of thinking around how we can get different functions talking to one another, people with different job roles, so that the value that's generated in one part of the organization then actually tracks through. Because, you know, many of you on this call have worked in these big organizations where something really positive looks like it's happening, and then it just gets blocked and blocked and blocked in different areas. And so I know that that's a smaller version of community, but it is still a community to be thinking about what's going on within the organization and how that links together as well. So build community at every level, and de-specialize your world as much as you can.
Thank you. Before we move on to our last question before opening up for audience Q&A, just quickly wanted to ask Leonie your thoughts on basically the climate work ecosystem in Europe. What has, changed in the last kind of 12 months, let's say, in terms of the opportunities that you're seeing, available for, whether you're this kind of internal change activist or someone who's looking to kind of transition into a climate specific role? And how do you anticipate this kind of concept of climate work evolving and this ecosystem evolving in the next few years? Will, every job, so you've mentioned that you think every job is a climate job. It's just a question of whether it's a good one or not. But will every company, become a sort of climate company by default sooner or later? It would just be great to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, big question. If I can be really cheeky and also touch on, I think, the question before as well, one piece of advice I would have is to get really good at asking questions. I think a lot of people think that they need to present a lot of knowledge. This is an inherently science-based space, and that can be tricky. No one expects you to go into a conversation knowing everything, for example, about nuclear fusion, as Matthew said. Actually, you stand to learn a lot by asking really good questions and demonstrating really genuine curiosity. So yeah, don't be intimidated by some of the science-based conversations in this space. Just ask really good questions. Yes, I think going off the premise that every job is a climate job means technically every company is a climate company, but again, it's just a case of are they doing good or are they doing bad, or where are they in that sliding scale, or is it a whole complicated mix of maybe both, depending on which part of the company you're looking at and what activity you're focused on? And that's a really annoying answer from me, and I'm very aware of that. But I do think that what I hope we see over the next 5 to 10 years is a gradual shift in what I call the confidence gap. We talk a lot about the skills gap. And I think there is a massive skills gap. We know that. We need a lot more sustainability leads. We need a lot more engineers. We need a lot more blue collar workers. We can physically create a lot of this technology. We can design the most efficient heat pump. We need to then deploy it. We need people who know how to go in and take out a gas boiler and put in a heat pump. So there's a very, very practical element to the skills that we absolutely need. And quite honestly, a lot of them we're chronically behind on. And a lot of that is blue collar work. And a lot of that is inherently engineering based. That is what we see a lot of the time. A lot of our portfolio companies are in Europe. And those are skills that they're always looking for. I think also there's a lot of technologies at the moment are reaching a really interesting inflection point where they have kind of proven themselves and kind of been tested, and the groundwork has been laid in that company for that tech to be rolled out. Now we're looking a lot for really amazing heads of sales, really, really user-focused product managers, people who can again assist that very literal deployment of the technology and get it into people's hands. Fundamentally, I think a lot of that work is B2B, which is really interesting. We need to be shifting heavy industry. We need to be selling into heavy industry. We need people who know how to sell into large chemical companies. So that is definitely a shift we are seeing. Engineers are always in demand, perpetually in demand, especially any kind of thermal, electrical, hardware. So those are the shifts I've seen. But I think going back to how I think this will change over the next 5 to 10 years, I think on a grander scale, I'm hopeful that we will see a confidence shift. more than anything. I think we will see people start to connect the dots better between the type of work they do and the type of impact that they're having. I think we'll see the continued rise of really accessible and thoughtful and effective learning resources that so many people on this call are building. And I think that will be incredible. I think it will be easier than ever for people to understand the impact that they're having. And I think as a result, it'll be easier than ever for people to build the agency that they need to then take action. We can't just rest on awareness and understanding to then leap to action. There's like this really healthy middle of agency as well. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we will hopefully see people build and build and build their agency, and for us to to have enabled like millions of people to be taking action in some way, large or small. So that's my hope, at least.
Thank you. So I'm conscious of time. We want to have as much time for our audience Q&A. So I'm going to invite each panelist to share perhaps a kind of brief response to this last question. So we've, one of the themes that we've touched on a few times today is kind of sustainable, what I would call sustainable activism, and the importance of avoiding burnout. And so I'd love to hear from each of you, on a kind of personal level, what brings you hope and energizes you as you engage in climate work on a daily basis. And then also kind of looking to the week ahead and all these events that we've got coming up, kind of what are you most excited about? So perhaps, Pauline, you could kick us off.
Yes, very briefly, community is key. So that what gives me joy, spending time, my hand in nature, trying to grow food that I don't succeed to do, looking at my daughter, knowing why I do that. And I think for this week, it's really the conversation that's happening in the Q&A and the chat. I see that's where there's like massive connection. And I think that's what's going to be amazing about this week.
Thank you. Jess?
Yeah, I think that this is even a conversation is huge, that there's an acknowledgement that this work is not easy and that there are components to it that lead to burnout. I think it opens up the opportunity for us to explore different ways of living and being and showing up in the work and modeling that for our organization. So that's very inspiring as well. And a shout out, we're hosting a networking session on Friday where we'll look into the climate action Venn diagram with a Terradu educator, which is an amazing tool for helping understand how you can work in climate without burning out. So check out the agenda for that.
Thank you. Matthew?
I think I talked before about how it's good that people know this is an emergency. I think that we're still a way off people understanding the depth and urgency of this. I think people are waking up to this. I think few people are thinking about how there will be tens of millions of people trying to get into Europe and move across Europe soon. And that, I know this, as you asked for a hopeful kind of positive thing here, but I think that it's great to see so many people on this initial call thinking about this. And I know there'll be many people coming to the things later in the week as well. And I think that's a really positive thing, because what do each of you who have come here today want your legacy to be? Because this is the biggest change that has happened in perhaps the whole of human history. And I am very excited about the potential for things to change quickly. When I was at university, I remember sat in a lecture about solar panels and they were saying, this is going to be many decades away. And 5 years later, they were growing exponentially. And now they're growing so fast that you can totally see solar overtaking other forms of energy alongside with wind. And so I'm really excited about the exponential change that's going on in the real world, in physical things, but I'm also excited about the exponential change that's happening among people who are realizing how important this is and how important it is to learn about it, build community, and dedicate ourselves to it as well. So thanks all for being here.
Thank you. Vicky?
Thank you. I think, I actually still am learning how to manage that energy and not burning out. I think we're always on that learning journey. of what our boundaries are and how we can have as much impact as we want to have versus like actually looking after ourselves. And I think for me, just having a daily walk in nature, I've got a local nature reserve where I live, and just taking the dog out, even if I'm like, I'm so busy, it's just getting out there for at least half an hour of a walk a day. But also just, you know, to Matthew's point, being really inspired by what's actually happening already and getting hopeful about that. And spending my weekends, or if I have holiday time, actually going around the UK and visiting amazing rewilding nature restoration projects like NEP and you know, places in like in Scotland like Dundragon, where you go and you're like, wow, like this is, you know, you see the tangible impacts of people really delivering stuff. So just immersing yourself in nature, but in places that have already been transformed through a lot of hard work over the last couple of decades. So I think that is for me the hopeful thing. And also, yeah, just being around people that are doing similar things to me, and just getting away from my computer screen and actually being with people in person, I think is really, really helpful.
And Leonie?
The phrase that comes to mind is things in motion stay in motion. And I think taking great satisfaction from small wins and small steps, um, and giving yourself time and grace. And occasionally it might be uncomfortable for so many people, but like patting yourself on the back for the things you are doing and have done, I think will really help you build momentum. And I think that will be really satisfying and is really motivating. I know that really motivates me. It ebbs and flows, but whenever there are good little stories of someone I've helped or something we've done, or like a stat that comes through or something I hear, that is hugely motivating. So yeah, I think, you know, burnout is definitely a risk, and as I think Vicky mentioned, like I'm still figuring that out. Uh, but taking a moment to be like, I'm doing okay. Like I'm doing my best. That's really what I can do. I think is important along the way. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind to hopefully like mitigate burnout.
Thank you. So we have five or so minutes remaining and quite a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to open up for audience Q&A. I do encourage everyone to upvote each other's questions. We have, I think, 5 or 6 questions, or actually maybe more like 10 in the chat. One of which I think has a few upvotes. So I wonder if any panelists would like to comment on the most important transferable or transformational skills needed beyond technical or sector specific skills.
I'm happy to jump in here. I mean, I think I'm not qualified to answer this question, but I think a lot of what I've seen in my work is that you just need people who have a really good kind of problem solving skills, and people who are willing to kind of constantly shift their mindset on things and be open and having that kind of curious mindset and willing to see other possibilities. And I think people who also who are generalists, so people who are really good at lots of different things. And again, like people who are just kind of really good communicators, right? People who are able to like kind of break down really kind of complicated things and putting it into much kind of smaller, simple ways of communicating. So yeah, I think, yeah, I was just responding to the first question beyond technical sector specific skills.
Matthew,
And adding on to communications, persuasive communications as well, especially when trying to story tell around how those skills are transferable. So both in getting the job as well as keeping it.
Yeah, I'd agree with those things. I'd say on top of that, it's useful to have people who are comfortable with being quite contrarian. I think that it can be very easy for things to kind of go along with the story that we've been going along with for a very long time. And I think so much of what has to happen is a set of very significant changes in narrative. And so people who are quite ready to kind of push for something very different, I think that's quite an interesting skill.
There's a related question specifically around what startup founders are looking for in their core team when they're kind of building climate companies. I feel like, Leonie, this might be a good one for you to answer.
Yeah. Generalists for sure. people who have a proven track record of doing things. That sounds so vague, but it's so true. People who can deal with uncertainty, have got stuck in, who know that, like, if you're thinking specifically early stage startup, know that 0 to 1, that's a really ambiguous space, and that can be a real challenge. Who have created something, set up something, shown that they can lead, take initiative, are very, very comfortable being given the keys and told to figure it out. You can show that in myriad of ways from the work you're currently doing. But people who have, built something and are very comfortable in that kind of mindset of building something. It sounds obvious, but it's surprising how easy it is to not communicate that you have that, or not show that you have that, especially on like a CV or a cover letter.
Go for it, Matthew.
I've founded several climate companies, and I would say that you want people who are able to wear many hats and are able to be very capable at multiple different things at once. And obviously, companies go through many different stages. The very early ones will want people who can do loads of things. The later ones will want people who are just very good at their jobs, and often those jobs really have very, very little to do with climate directly, and that's okay. So in terms of transferable skills, if you are good at, as Leonie was saying, sales, for example, like there are loads of climate companies that need you. So there are plenty of those kinds of opportunities.
Thank you. Well, I wish we had time for more questions, because there's lots of great questions in the chat, and I will invite our panelists whilst I'm wrapping up to add any thoughts that they might have into the Q&A function for our audience. But I just wanted to quickly wrap up. So we've heard so much today. I mean, I think this has been such an insightful discussion. I'm so grateful to our panelists. A few things that I'm kind of taking away from the conversation today. I think anyone can drive climate action at work fundamentally, whatever your role, whether it's an internal activist, which is often where you can have the greatest impact, or by joining a climate focused role organization if that's the right decision for you. Ultimately, it's about choosing a path that aligns, I think, with your strengths, with your values, and with your goals. And so, you can go about a very deliberate kind of evaluation thought process to kind of figure out what the right path is for you. Building a climate career and doing effective climate work, it does require resilience. We've kind of mentioned that in various forms today. So whichever path you choose, don't do it alone. Find like-minded people, communities, like those that we've heard from today, who can really support and energize you, on this journey. And if you don't find the right group, then really consider starting one, because more often than not, there'll be many others who are kind of like you, who would benefit from that. So yeah, the opportunities to make a difference are really vast, and so are the learning and career resources and communities that are here to support you. So please take what resonated with you today, and think about maybe perhaps one or two things that you can kind of start implementing today, wherever you are in your journey. And with that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your insight and your experiences. And to all of you, in our audience, for joining, and for the thoughtful questions that you've shared with us. Really, don't forget to check out climateweek.org for the full schedule of events this week. This really is just kickstarting a week of many, many events by lots of brilliant partners. So we hope to see you throughout the week, and thank you again.